Hello. Well, this is a quick follow-up video from the last two. Basically, I got the replacement 6850 chips and plugged it in, thinking it would all work fine, and well, it didn't. So the rest of this video is to try and find out why, and if I can, and yeah, let's see. So these are the modifications I've done since the last video. First of all, whilst I was waiting for the 6850 to arrive, I installed a 74LS11 here to allow me to change over to the 1 meg ROMs. I have to change a few of the jumpers here, which are solder jumpers, so just use some solder wick to take the old solder off and flow some new solder onto the other jumper pads. I've installed the Exos ROM switcher because I don't actually have a 2 ROM version of 1.04. But anyway, after 2 weeks of waiting for the chips to arrive, mostly stuck in Royal Mail, the new 6850s arrived. Put one in, and it doesn't work. Still a problem where if you've got the MIDI 6850 in there, the keyboard doesn't work. And looking at the with the scope, it looks as though again the interrupt line is being asserted constantly. So I think the next thing to do will be to get the logic analyzer out. So here we are with the non-working board set up with the logic analyzer. I had to use an 8-channel one because my 16-channel one started producing spurious results, which means I can't trust it whatsoever. I've previously set this up on a working system and recorded the data, and I've just finished recording data on this broken system. So here's the data from the logic analyzer. This is for the working system, and if we go to the beginning, we see the IQ has gone low. This is when I've actually hit the return key after selecting the MIDI test. So what we get here is, first of all, the system selects the MIDI port with CS0 high, CS1 high. It's not registered because its register select is low. So it's doing a read. So it's actually reading from trying to read from the MIDI port. Then it's doing a read, same thing, but from the keyboard port. And finally, because it's got some data, it's then resetting the interrupt by reading from the keyboard status register. So the register select is high. This is basically a normal for every keyboard read or every time the interrupt goes low. Let's zoom out and go to the next thing. And if we look here, we get exactly the same thing as we saw at the beginning. That's probably the release of the return key. So the next thing to see will be the test, the MIDI test. So if we zoom out again and find the next piece of activity. Right, CS0 is high, CS1 is high, register select is low, and it's a write. So it's writing to the MIDI port. Does another write to the MIDI port, waits a while, does a read from the MIDI port, and finally it writes to the MIDI port control register. and that's basically all that happens. The system is probably waiting for an interrupt to say that the 6850 has had some data come in on its lines, because you'd normally have a loopback cable in the MIDI port. So anyway, let's switch to the non-working version. Again, it starts exactly the same way with the keyboard read, the interrupt caused by the keyboard. Exactly the same happens here. Then it does the test, which is again a MIDI port right, MIDI port right, MIDI port read, and then a write to the control register. However, after a short while, you get an interrupt raised. And it does a MIDI read. It then does a MIDI control register write, at which point the interrupt gets released. A bit later, we get a write to the MIDI port, followed by another write to the MIDI port. Then we get a read from the keyboard. And a read from the MIDI port. And effectively, this replicates every, say, how many, 10 milliseconds continuously. I've checked all the data lines between the two, working and non-working. They look the same. There's nothing on the MIDI port input line that's continuously low. So I have no idea why this is different from the working version. Slight addendum. When I was just wrapping up the videos just now, I was saying that all the inputs to the chip were the same on the working and non-working board. Then I realised that's because I hadn't checked what the logic level on the MIDI input port was. I knew on the non-working board it was low, but I couldn't remember what it was on the working board. So I quickly checked, and it was high, which means the RX, the receive line on the MIDI port or at the chip, is supposed to be low. This basically rang a bell. Basically, something's wrong here. I looked on the schematics again, and the only thing between the RX line, the RX line here and the MIDI port itself is an opto isolator. I checked the pull-up resistor, that's fine. But after removing, come on, it's always, there we go. After removing the opto isolator and trying again, the system works. If I go on to the, if I swap over to the oscilloscope, the oscilloscope, why is that gone to there? Of course, I've got to change the input. So if I go over to the oscilloscope, as you can see, the input voltage to the MIDI port is high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the interrupt is actually low. Let's change the scale a bit. So if I go into the MIDI input, as you can see, the interrupt is mostly high, only goes low whenever the keyboard is being active. So I think I've found the culprit. What I've got to do now is find online another one of these. So after that eureka moment, the problem was this chip. But given that the 6850 that was on the MIDI port was also bad, I'm guessing some very high voltage somehow got through the MIDI port, blew this chip, sent the voltage through that into the 6850 and fried that as well. So all I've got to do now is find a replacement one of these and the machine should be fixed. Wow, that's quite a journey. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It just helps other people see the video. And yeah, well, see you next time.